But first, what you need to know about the key groups of Arizona voters who could pick the next president.
And it was like out of a movie. The wooden doors broke open, and John McCain came walking into the well of the United States Senate and said, "No, you don't. No, you don't."
We know that if we want strong communities and strong families, people need good jobs. The best welfare program is a job. The best welfare program is a dignified work that pays a good wage.
Just a couple sound bites from the week that was. This week's start of early voting in our battleground state was like an alarm bell for the competing presidential campaigns. They are all rushing here. Over the last several days, Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris spoke in the Valley. The vice presidential nominees, Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Republican Senator J.D. Vance, both campaigned in the Valley and Tucson. On Sunday, Republican nominee Donald Trump holds a rally up north in Prescott Valley. And former President Barack Obama is on the way. Obama will rally Democrats in Tucson on October 18th. You know what? I think Arizona matters. So, who are the Arizona voters who could pick the next president? We have three trends to watch. Joining me is Thom Reilly, co-director of ASU Center for an Independent and Sustainable Democracy. He scoured the data. Voter registration trends worth watching. Welcome back to Square Off.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with independence. We've been talking about independence for years. This year, I think we're seeing the rise of independence.
You know, clearly, if we add independents and the small parties together, they edge out Republicans in vote. About 35.5% are independent small parties, Republicans about 34.4%, and Democrats about 29%. But most interesting, if we look at new voter registration since May, over 50%.
Over 50%?
More than the two-party combined.
Over 50% since May are independent registrations.
So those that are registering are distinctly independent.
And so we've been talking about them for years, and we always add the caveat, they don't vote in proportion to their numbers, in proportion to their voter registrations.
Yeah, so in the last presidential election in 2020, about 29% of those that were registered independent voted. They were about 32, 33%. So a little less. They performed better in presidential elections. But they're unpredictable. I mean, they're notoriously ticket splitters, and they're unpredictable in their voting. You know, right now it's all about the ground game. It's Republicans and Democrats getting their base out. But the largest voting bloc are independents. So who is driving those individuals to the polls when they could be a decisive group of voters? And
why are they all making the choice to go independent and not with the party in a much larger proportions than before? Do we know?
Yeah, and that trend is, you know, Arizona is somewhat of a bellwether nationally. Is that as the parties become more polarized, people are leaving. They're leaving and identifying with other parties. You know, they're not undecided necessarily. You know, they vote, and many may lean Republican and Democrats. But for whatever reason, whether they're embarrassed to say they're part of the party or they just don't want to be part of it, remains a big issue.
Keep an eye on them. I think we'll dig a little deeper into independence in a second. But first, let's go to Gen Z voters, ages, 20 to 30?
Yeah, it's usually those that are born after 1997.
Yeah.
So we lump them together under 30. They're about a fifth of our voting bloc. Nationally, Gen Z voters have had the biggest turnout in the last two elections. The last presidential election...
Biggest turnout rate, you mean?
Yes, the rate. The last presidential election, they actually mirrored the rate in 1972, which was the highest percent when 18-year-olds were given the right to vote. In Arizona, we have our latest data shows that, again, this group is distinctly independent, 49%. The majority of these are not party associated. They're not affiliated with the parties. So their vote, if they turn out, could be a pivotal group. You know, I tell young people in my class all the time that if you vote the same rate as your boomer counterparts, you'd rule the world.
I tell my kids that too.
But I will say that in 2020 in Arizona, those that were registered, 57% came out, which was only second to the boomers at 63%. So if this group is motivated, and our research seems to suggest, when we asked them, 2/3 of them said they were highly motivated to vote in the 2024 election. And they were as motivated by the presidential as they were about ballot issues. So they could be a pivotal group if they show up.
All right. And now we've also talked on this program about the growing impact of Latino voters over several cycles. You say they're coming of age this year. What's
Definitely.
going on?
So part of that is looking, if we look at those under the age of 30 that are registered, 31% are Latino. That about mirrors our population of 33%. A long time we keep talking about the Latino vote is a young vote, it's a young population, but they're coming of age. So at this election, 31% of those under the age of 30 are actually Latino. They tend to be a bit more progressive, the younger Latino vote, but they could have a decisive impact. And like the kind of thematic issues we've been talking about, 52% of those are independent.
And yet they're not as safe a Democratic vote as they were, say, back in 2012.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, they're leaving the Democratic Party, not necessarily always converting to Republican. I think the bigger story is they're becoming more party affiliated. And I think that is a trend we need to watch, both in Arizona and nationally. Gen Z voters and their millennial counterparts distinctly are independent and they're not joining parties. And that has serious repercussions when we look at our two-party system and how elections are run in the United States.
That's the future.
It is.
All right, Thom Reilly, great insights. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.